Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. With me today, I have Professor David Aworawo, Professor of International Relations and Strategic Studies at the University of Lagos, and Jideofor, legal practitioner and national development advocate. Chinese company Songshan Funcheng has rejected Nigeria's offer of $5 million for the release of new aircraft on the country's presidential fleet. The aircraft was impounded by authorities in France at the behest of the Chinese company after it secured a court victory for breach of contract against a subnational government in Nigeria, in this case, Ogun State. When President Bola Tinubu travels to Beijing for the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation shortly, and I think that on September 4 to 6, FOCAC is September 4 to 6, and to prop up the Naira as part of the agenda. This publicized feud with Songshan will likely be a major feature of the interactions. The firm has described its ordeal with Nigeria as a foreign investor's worst nightmare. Meanwhile, unlike taxi firm, both has restricted inter-country requests between Nigeria and South Africa after the two countries' social media rivalry reached an all-time high or low, with people booking and then canceling rides in the other nation as a prank. The drivers were pawns in this malicious game, as they were sent on a wild goose chase to find passengers who weren't even in the same country. It is unclear how this boat war started, but social media users in sub-Saharan Africa's two biggest economies have a long history of trolling each other. The boat war also reportedly caused prices to surge in both countries, leaving many people stranded as they couldn't afford to pay for their rides. And now to American politics, where the Democratic National Convention won down on Friday in Chicago, with Kamala Harris formally accepting the nomination to be president. It was a lively final night with speeches from Elizabeth Warren and Gretchen Whitmer and a performance from Pink. From Chicago, Arise international correspondent Faith Orr sent in the following report. Meanwhile, in a related development, Republican candidate Donald Trump, touting plans on taxes and health, has tried to turn the page on a week in which it was overshadowed by Kamala Harris and struggled to focus on policy issues ahead of the November election instead of personal attacks in the U.S. Presidential race. And now joining me to look at some of these international issues, including the crisis in the Middle East, where Hezbollah has fired rockets and Israel feels obliged to return with fear of an all-out war in the Middle East. I'm now being joined by Jideofor Adibe, Professor of Political Science at Nasarawa State University, Kefi, and founder of Adonis and Abe Publishers in Abuja, Nigeria. Good to see you, Professor Jideofor Adibe. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Dr. Abati, and welcome back from your holidays.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back.
I saw the photographs.
Yes, before we talk, about international issues, let's start with, well, it's also international, of course, about the jet, the new jet that the president acquired. People are complaining. They say they want more details. How much did it cost? What happened to the old aircraft in the presidential jet? Just questions about transparency and accountability. And then the seizure of Nigerian properties, sovereign assets by a Chinese company in Liverpool, in France, and also now in Canada, because a Supreme Court in Quebec, has also ruled that Nigerian assets, a Bombardier aircraft, belonging to the Nigerian government, connected to the OPL 247 issue, can be attached also. Now, they say that the arbitral court awarded to the Chinese company is $70 million. It looks like they are in every jurisdiction. They want to attach every asset belonging to Nigeria. What lessons can we learn from that? And then the issue about transparency and accountability in the procurement of an aircraft for the president.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Bati. Let me start with the issue of transparency. I think Nigerians are right to demand details of the purchase. I read somewhere that it was purchased for $100 million and that a similar one was bought somewhere for $15 million. And some of the defenders of the decision to buy the presidential aircraft complained that the presidential aircraft is 19 years old and was bought under Obasanjo. And then I also read something that the American, the one that carries the American president, Air Force One, I think, is 34 years old. So it's the government really needs to come clean. Did he purchase it with $100 million, using another $50 million to fit it? We need to know, did it pass through budgetary processes and the rest? But this also adds to lack of the opacity in much of the transactions of the government. And if you talk about the Chinese, don't forget, the lesson is very clear. In the year 2021, the Chinese government, for a loan of $207 million, seized Entebbe by Ugandan government, seized Entebbe airport and confiscated a number of assets because that money was owed to the Chinese Import-Export Bank, Exim Bank. So it is a lesson, especially for the government that has been binging on Chinese loan. In fact, figures from the Debt Management Office shows that as at December 2023, we are owing the Chinese government $5.16 billion. So you can imagine what will happen if we default. This is a signal of something to caution us against binging on debts. And, we have to see how it works out. It also tells you that there's a little trust of our own judicial system. I read the defense by Ibikunle Amosun that the company in question lost all the cases in Nigeria. If they went ahead and were able to win at the arbitration panel headed by the former president of UK Supreme Court, it also tells you something about the state of our judicial system, whether international actors are not showing that they don't have confidence in our system. And they took it elsewhere. As you rightly mentioned, they got in France, they got in Quebec, and even in Liverpool. Some of assets belonging to the Nigerian government were also confiscated. And we don't know what happens next. We just have to wait. But that should really be a warning signal to the government and to the subnationals that go on debt binging. You see at the subnational level, the way governors behave like emperors. They can just come in one night, they don't like your face, they pull down your house. Or contracts that were negotiated and signed by their predecessors, they forget the fact that the government is a continuum. They just almost arbitrarily will just cancel the contracts. Ibikunle Amosun was arguing that, had his own reason that it was a conflict between two Chinese companies and all that and all that. I'm not very sure if he took all his arguments to the arbitration panel that was, headed by the president or a former president of the UK Supreme Court.
Yeah, in specific terms, what are the lessons we can learn from this? Because some people have been saying, look, this was a commercial transaction, sovereign assets cannot be attached. But under public international law, it's country to country, even when subnationals are involved, because a country gives sovereign guarantees. And then, of course, there's something about the sanctity of contract. There's also about agreements being respected. Pacta sunt servanda. But many Nigerians are saying, oh, this is our national asset. It's the people of Ogun State. In fact, somebody sent me a text message that being from Ogun State, I should stay away from China because I could be seized as a collateral for what the state government has done.
Yes, sir. Yeah, Dr. Badi, in one of my appearances here, I know we raised the question of whether international law is really law. There is no known international law that has not been, quote unquote, violated. So, and the court, the UK courts and Canadian court, I think it was the Canadian court that rejected the whole notion of sovereign immunity. And the point now is there is enough embarrassment for the country, and you cannot be expecting international investors to come around when this has really gone viral, when this is like a caution to prospective investors. And then for debt binging, people who kept on accumulating debts, hoping that somehow at the end of it they will go again to beg for debt forgiveness, that should be a cautionary note. The Chinese, they say they don't smile. They may have small eyes, as people say, but they see opportunities and they know how to fight back. So we have to be very careful. Also, the idea of how to monitor more the behavior of governors, because we tend to focus excessively on what happens at the centers, forgetting that the way some of the governors carry themselves, it's just worse than being an emperor. You know, you can imagine in virtually all states, in most of the states, if you have a disagreement with your predecessor, some of the projects they start, contracts signed, you see that they just cancel them. And we saw that in several, not just with this case. We saw that with Jokota, we saw that with Obasanjo's effort to, concession our oil refineries, which are Yaradua again cancelled, and they refunded the money to Dangote. These are part of the things we should be looking at: sustainability and making sure that projects that were embarked upon by one's predecessors are properly protected by law. The contracts that establish those working arrangements, and that because you are called Your Excellency at your state level, you behave like emperor, and at your whim and caprice, you just do whatever you like. So that's a caution, a note that we should be very careful in what we do. And as you say, Dr. Abati, when they run out of assets to be seized, they can come to you. You were lucky when you were vacationing in the UK, they could come after you and as a face of Nigeria and then take you away.
Well, I'm back home now. No Chinese is going to take me as collateral. Anyway, do you think that there's a chance for President Tinubu at the diplomatic level when he goes for the Forum on Africa-China Cooperation in September to address this issue diplomatically? Although, law says arbitration awards under New York Convention can be enforced.
Yeah, I think there are prospects. One, because we are highly indebted to China. We are owing them $5.16 billion according to the data from the DMO, Office of Debt Management Office. So it is in our own interest that we do not aggravate situations that will, make it difficult for us to reschedule debts that are maturing. We're also an important market for China, and I hope that the Chinese government will also realize that and be able to. The company has made its point. Be able to see this as create room for further negotiations. It's also a lesson for the subnationals. I do not believe most of the things that Governor Ibikunle Omosun said, because the governors tend to be the same across the country. Emperors that do not want to be challenged. I think that the grounds are there. People say, very rich people say that the reasons the banks, if you owe banks a lot of money, it's easy for you to negotiate. But if you owe a little and what the collateral you have can offset your debt, the banks will come after you immediately. So because we are highly indebted, if you follow that logic, because we are highly indebted to them and they don't want to risk our reneging on those debt obligations, that will make the Chinese government hopefully be more willing to negotiate. And the fact that we're also an important market for them.
Okay, let's talk quickly about this taxi war between Nigeria and South Africa, triggered by a beauty matter, Chidinma Adetshina who is now participating in the Miss Universe program in Nigeria, who was rejected in South Africa. Issues raised about her mother's nationality and about her own identity. Now Nigerians have taken it to the level of a taxi war, boat war, as it is otherwise known. Why is it that perpetually Nigeria and South Africa we seem to be at war, at a people-to-people level, considering the fact, again, that Nigeria spent millions, if I may say billions perhaps, to pursue the end of apartheid in South Africa? Do you think that the South Africans are ungrateful to the Nigerian nation?
Dr. Abati, this thing, your last statement is very common with Nigerians. They say others don't respect us for what we did for them. South Africa doesn't respect us for our role in the apartheid struggle, anti-apartheid struggle. But in international relations, your respect is not determined by your past benevolence. It is purely a function of the current leverages you are able to bring on the table. So, yes, you did something right in the past, but that doesn't matter. The stomach does not remember the fact that you gave it breakfast when it gets, the pangs of hunger starts hitting you in the night, in the evening for your dinner. So we just have to go beyond that sense of entitlement. And even when people say they don't remember, we have a number of Nigerians working in South Africa and remitting money. And their role in the remittance or economy, should not be overlooked. But then to go back to that, the war on Uber, what caused it, the way I read it, was not necessarily the Chidinma additional issue, but just prank by a South African guy who held a boat, because they were able to get access to the boat app in Nigeria, and then asked the boatman to pick him up at a certain spot in Cross River State. And when he was very close, the guy just canceled. And then he made a short clip of that. And that kind of enraged Nigerians, not enraged, but we say that we consciousness is higher when there is an external enemy to fight. I'm sure you read the book 1984, how George Orwell used it to paint the picture of a totalitarian state. So that's really what triggered it. But some people actually believe that Nigeria is more like envious of South Africa. Because if you look at it, Nigeria used to be the #1 African economy, and at least since the time it was rebased under Jonathan government. Now it's now in the 4th position. South Africa's GDP is 400 billion, almost 400 billion. Second position now has gone to Egypt. The 3rd position has gone to Algeria, and Nigeria is lagging at the 4th position. And it keeps attached to its past of the big role, the big brother role it played during the apartheid struggle in South Africa. There are other things that are probably the issue in South Africa-Nigeria relation. Sometimes they talk about xenophobia, but xenophobia is also here in Nigeria. In fact, you find prejudice in almost all societies. At the heart of some of them is South Africa is comparatively a smaller country than Nigeria. We used to call ourselves the giant of Africa. But suddenly from 1994, when it came out of the apartheid, the international community welcomed South Africa. And suddenly Nigeria got a competitor in who should be the quote-unquote giant of Africa in the real sense. Giant of Africa is not measured only by population. Don't forget that Britain that colonized most of the world at that time had less than 20 million people. So the point then is, now South Africa in 2010, they successfully hosted a World Cup. South Africa is a member of BRICS. South Africa successfully hosted a BRICS summit in 2023. Now, some of the permutations that were going on the enlargement of the UN Security Council, one of the most famous was the one that was to give 3 slots to African countries. And many countries were being proposed. Nigeria was a front runner, Kenya was a front runner, South Africa, Nigeria's argument then was it was the largest economy. It had played a number of roles on the international scene. But now look at what's happening in the configuration of the world. Suddenly you have South Africa, which is the number one, the strongest economy, not just technologically, but in terms of development. You see the fact that it has successfully hosted a World Cup, done BRICS, is projecting power on the international scene by leading other African countries to mediate in the Ukraine crisis. While they are doing this, Nigeria is sitting back mourning, unable to achieve elite consensus among itself. Then, of course, you have another now. If South Africa takes the slot that should come to Black Africa, Egypt has always been saying, look, we are the bridge between Africa, Black Africa and the Arab world, which, seemed at that time to resonate to a number of international diplomats. Meanwhile, South Africa is also saying it's the bridge between the white world and the black world. And then there is Ethiopia, which historically is the headquarters of Africa in terms of African Union, Organization of African Unity, one of the African countries that was never, colonized. So if we go by that kind of initial, proposed structure, I think it was under Kofi Annan, you can see that Nigeria's chances of getting a permanent slot in the UN Security Council seems to be shrinking. And we keep pointing fingers at South Africa. Of course, South Africa has own issues. It has over 100 companies in Nigeria. I don't know how many companies Nigeria has in South Africa, except perhaps prayer houses and branches of mega churches in South Africa. Nigeria exports crude to South Africa. You have a whole series of things they import from South Africa, including apples. So there's been a kind of rivalry that South Africa seems to look down on Nigeria, probably because we are not able to get our acts together. Okay. But there's much more to it.
Okay, Professor Adibe, let's go to the United States, where it looks like the presidential race is entering its final stretch. Recently, the Democratic Party had its national convention, with Kamala Harris delivering a very powerful speech, standing on her feet, breaking the glass ceiling. So we have Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, effectively endorsed. But at the same time, on the Republican side, we have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Withdrawing his candidacy in critical swing states, Arizona, Texas, even if it is late to do so, in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, some of the other battleground states. But he's now supporting Donald Trump. So the dynamics keep changing. But clearly now, it is Trump versus Kamala Harris. What are your predictions? What is your reading? Even now that Kamala Harris has effectively, again, energized the base of the Democrats in this race. And people, one side or the other, and Nigerians even saying, oh, we support Trump, we support Kamala Harris, even if many of us don't have a dog in that fight.
Thank you, Dr. Bati. Our support does not make whether you support or don't support, it doesn't make any difference. But the way I see it is that it's going to be a very tight race. Why do I say that? Currently, there's a poll of what they call poll of polls, a poll of an average of 133 polls, which shows that Kamala Harris is leading by 3.6 percentage points. It's not a big one. Normally, after every convention of any party, they get what they call a bounce. And Kamala Harris is still, luxuriating from the fact that the way she came in to become the candidate, it took everyone unawares. And that crucial endorsement by the Clintons, by the Obamas, and in fact by the top Democratic personalities, including Nancy Pelosi. So that bounce is going to be there. The Republican Party seems to be struggling now on how to frame the narrative. While, for example, when it was Biden, they had already framed him as somebody too weak, too old, sleeping Joe, he has lost it, he's too old to run. Now with Kamala Harris, it's difficult. They haven't found really something to pin on her, but they are hoping that the debate will open her up. Remember in 2019, she tried to run for the to be the presidential candidate of the Democratic Party. You know, it didn't work. And Trump, you know, as expected, puts a jab. Democratic Party are united in many ways because they have successfully framed Trump as somebody who is a threat to American democracy. They framed him as somebody who lies repeatedly. And then Donald Trump himself has said that he will use state powers to come after opponents. These are scary. They painted a picture of somebody who is extremely scary. So how do they handle Harris? There is not much. For now, their opinions say, okay, Biden was very unpopular with immigration policies. That's the only thing they are talking about now. But hopefully, by the time they get to the debate, they will see whether they get an opening and then frame, meaning framing the strategy in such a way that they will repeatedly hit and see if it sticks. Apart from that, Professor Alan Lichtman, who has predicted, is a professor of history at American University in Washington, D.C., who has correctly predicted every single presidential election outcome since 1984. Of course, the only one he lost was the George Bush versus, what's his name again? You know, the one by George Bush. But even then, he said he wasn't correct because the other guy got the majority. Professor Lichtman has said he's going to make official his own analysis on September 2nd. So we are waiting to see. In fact, people are using his own criteria. He uses what they call 13 keys. And then by analysis of the 13 keys, he uses what people say are scientific methods of arriving at a conclusion of who is likely to win. So people are going to work at it. But I have three major concerns. One is what they call the Bradley effect. Bradley effect is that in 1982, Tom Bradley, who was mayor of Los Angeles, ran for president against for governor of California against a white candidate. All the polls had him winning. Unfortunately, when the result came out, he lost. And then they said, okay, it's because social acceptability. Many voters didn't want to give their correct opinion for fear of being called racist. So it's called Bradley effect. How are they going to deal with, how are American voters going to deal with a black? She's called black following the one drop rule. Once there is a drop of black blood in you, you're black. How are they going to deal with a black candidate again? How are they going to do? Are they ready for a female president? These are things we don't know how it will work out. And then there is something they call October surprise, which military strategists will call fog of war. When you plan every strategy, there's always something you have missed that will come to be a game changer. So people usually watch out for October. Is there any new dynamic around October that will change the trajectory of the election?
Okay,
that's what we're waiting. Right now, the September 10 debate.
I get your point, Professor Adibe. The unknown factor, the X factor, coming into play possibly in the American election as the process enters its final stretch. The case you were trying to remember, I guess, must be George Bush versus Al Gore, I think. Al Gore, right?
Al Gore, yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining me on this live, the Sunday Talk Show.